your talk.
Hello. So just give me a second to try to master Zoom. So I'm attempting to share my screen now, and I'm attempting to share in advance portion of screen. Why do I still have only a portion of screen? Oh, okay. I found it, and hopefully I am sharing it.
Yes.
Have I succeeded? Awesome. All right. So initially, this talk was actually more theory-packed, but after listening to other people, I decided that I can always focus on theory, hopefully, in a chapter. And during the talk, I would like to just talk about games because they're much more interesting, in my opinion. So, oh, and this is not working. Okay. No? Yes? Yes. Okay. Sorry. So these are only for reference because I assume that we all have a concept of magic. So basically, I will be skipping through them rather fast. But I just wanted to mention that magic in fiction is usually generally primarily depicted as a source of harm and peril, as I mentioned here. The idea of defense is not absent, but is actually really scarce. And as far as, let's say, the origin of magic, it's usually portrayed according to the culture-related politics of magic. So the care for cultural accuracy is actually pretty the opposite of significant, pretty much. And there's a lot that goes into that, and mostly because the fiction market as such, if we take into consideration film and literature and just horror fiction in general, the fiction market is dominated by American influence. And if anyone is interested in that, I would be happy to elaborate on that during the Q&A. But for now, what I wanted to focus on is the fact that if, from the American perspective, the only opposite extremes are the truth of the Bible and atheism, at least according to Carol Fry, I'm sorry for that voice, then that's actually a very reductive perspective in horror fiction in general, because it excludes other religions, other practitioners, other technicians of the sacred, and so on and so forth. And if we talk about, sorry, I lost my shawl. If we talk about games, the portrayal of magic in horror games, specifically independent horror games, is actually not as political in the sense that it includes various kinds of magic of various origins, which also has to do with the concept that because of localization, I don't think there are American remakes of foreign games, let's say. Also another matter that I would happily discuss if you're interested in it. But getting back to more interesting things. So basically, if we think about, one second, I think, yes. If we think about representation and portrayal of magic in game text, any text, we can pretty much agree that it's mostly spells and rituals or artifacts and talismans. And the interesting thing here is that in horror games, we can see how the relationship, that there is a relationship between magic and immersion, and there's also a relationship between magic and agency, which is actually more important for us. And for the player, there's actually very little difference, effectively, between using an EMF meter and using a Ouija board. But this is in contrast to the Arthur C. Clarke's dictum that we've already heard before, that any technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic, because in games, it is technology that is supposed to work according to the laws of the supernatural. So it's supposed to help either face or fight the supernatural. So magic as such, the presence of magic actually works very well in the medium of video games, because it's, number one, facilitates the immersion, in the sense that the player's in the control of the avatar, and the avatar can actually participate in the magic happening on screen. So the avatar would, for example, think to themselves, like in Curse, like they feel like what they're doing is working, or for example, in Detention, the avatar can invoke the guidance of spirits for the use of the player, but within the world, it still facilitates immersion. And secondly, for us, more importantly, magic works well in the medium of games because it facilitates agency. And this means that players can take actions which obviously affect the outcome of the game, or at least affect the actualization, the emergent narrative as it is going on. So for example, in Detention, the player can distract a ghost with a food offering, placing it whenever and wherever, sometimes badly, and they die as a result, in order to distract ghosts, enemies in the game. And for example, in Night Way Home, which is the last screenshot there, the character can use the found oharae, the means of purification, to scare the creature that's pursuing her away. And that's actually very important for both immersion and agency. And this corresponds with the logic of the medium. I'm sorry, on the slide it's supposed to say medium specific with a hyphen. Sorry about that. So this medium specific logic actually means for us that there's practical employment of magic and the world building use of magic. And one, of course, is mechanics, and the other one is simply the narrative. And audiences seeking out audiences seeking out texts, including magic, are usually imaginative and flexible, and they are happy to suspend disbelief, and they appreciate magic of all kinds, including creatures, magical spells, magical places, but horror specifically, as Richard Rouse, the third, notes. The marriage between horror and games just seems too perfect for designers to avoid, according to him. And for us, the important part is that this presents an opportunity for game text to move away from simply emulating the effect that horror creates in other media, and instead employ the medium to actually explore the fear and darkness and anything associated with the horror medium, horror genre, in ways that no other medium would be able to do. So to simplify this, players can do things, which again, it comes down to agency and immersion. And I know that this might seem obvious, but there's something fascinating about being in the presence of magic and being able to use magic, actually use. So find, obtain, or receive a magic artifact. Attack, like, because above we see the shore and we receive an artifact there. Next to it, there is Project Nightmares, where you can create a working barrier with salt that actually works. You can attack and exorcise ghosts with magic dagger, like in Paper Dolls, or you can set a trap or perform a ritual, like in Evil Possession, the last one here. And this is very important because through the interplay of magic, I'm bad with words today. Through the interplay of mechanics, narrative, and the gameplay experience, the player can obtain and use the power to make impossible possible, which is yet another literal definition of magic. So to put it simply, magic can be a part of the fictional world. Magic can be used both on and by the avatar and the player, who can be treated a little bit interchangeably here, I guess. And also magic affects, empowers, but also endangers the avatar and therefore, let's say, the player. And horror can be used to introduce quite unique gameplay mechanics because of the fantastic settings it uses. And horror game can also introduce supernatural element. I'm sorry, I don't know how I ended up here. This is something broke horribly. I broke horribly, sorry. Okay, so in a game, when you think about agency and when you think about actual immersion, the events can be treated at their face value, not purely by imagination, but because of the emergent narrative. So in case of genuine and skillful fantasy, as Hassan points out, the audience can be put in a temporary state of enchantment. And if the suspension of disbelief is disturbed, that spell, that enchantment is broken and the art has failed. And if we look at good independent horror games, everything makes sense and fits together in a way that I think personally would not work in a film or work of literature. So for example, this comes from the game Plead with the Mountain God. And in this game, once again, the player can literally obtain and use the power without breaking that spell, that state of enchantment. They set out on a journey to ask the mountain god to bring their beloved, that lady, back to life. We don't have much background on her. And this, the game progresses, well, as far as mechanics is concerned, in a very logical way. There are levels, the game progresses, the avatar needs to move further and further. And every time when they would receive, let's say, a level up, they actually need to choose the action of praying for the mountain god's favor. And in turn, the mountain god blesses them with a gift. And those blessings come with a price, as you can probably tell by the changing shape of our human character. And this actually, it seems maybe like there is little choice because you need to accept those blessings in order to proceed. But that actually corresponds with the determination of the character when the protagonist, when the game starts, right? And the game does not resolve on its own once we reach that place. Again, there is an action, plead with the mountain god, that needs to be taken, which makes this a choice. We could argue that it's an illusory choice because, well, how do we finish the game otherwise? But still, it's an action that the player needs to take, and only then they receive the god's answer that their plea has been heard and their sacrifice has been weighed. And that answer, even if it's something that we might have expected, again, corresponds with the emergent narrative. It corresponds with the actualization of the game that the player has been creating. And now we're here. Sorry. So yes, and this is an example of how horror can introduce unique gameplay in fantastic settings. This is where I was supposed to say that. And also introduce supernatural elements that would justify why the player need unique abilities or unique skills. And that is not always the case. There are many horror games that feature magic or magical enemies, and they are no non-combat games, or sometimes they are kind of combat games, but for a very long time the player can only run away from the monster. And sometimes you do get quite interesting mechanics that are not really defensive, and they do not work magically. But for example, in A Song of Horror, which is the first screenshot there, in A Song of Horror, there is this mechanic where the player's basically surrounded and targeted by the darkness, which is an entity that can kill the player instantly. And the mechanics that they have at their disposal is like listening, or for example, trying to hold their breath, which are perfectly non-magical things to do, but they're supposed to protect the player from magic enemy. And this is what allows game text to break away from that which is familiar to us in literary horror narratives and film horror narratives. Like, game text can break away from that convention because essentially they empower the player by empowering the avatar. And this is my last slide, and I think I can finish this, yes, in time. So basically, there are ways that the player can actually change the turn of events in the game, sometimes because this is what the game not really expects the player to do, but pushes them to do. And sometimes they can even forgo the original goal and do something else. So, for example, in Curse, there is a moment that cannot be avoided where the spirit of Mary Chaucer needs to be exorcised, and the player's intention actually corresponds with the emergent narrative, where the protagonist shouts, leave this cursed place now, and the ritual works and the spirit is exorcised. In case of Faith and Paper Dolls, again, two bottom screenshots. In one case, we are dealing with the technician of the sacrum, and he's using a cross, which could be considered a magical weapon, depending on how we define religion. Let's move on. And in Paper Dolls, we can use the magical dagger to either defend ourselves and or fight the spirits. But the most interesting example, which is this one, this comes from a game called Pamali, Indonesian Folklore Horror, I guess. I should be better at this, but I do have a ludography. And this is from the chapter 3, The Little Devil. And the idea is that our protagonist searches a house, not any house, she inherited that house. So she searches the inherited house in order to gather valuables, and because she needs them in order to pay for her father's treatment. So she's doing this out of good intentions. And the idea is to gather valuables, exchange them for money, and that is one of the good endings. But Pamali is a very specific game, and it usually has between like 12 to 36 endings to one chapter. I seriously recommend checking out this game. And here, one of the endings, which can be freely chosen by the player, the game in no way pushes the player to do this. Instead of taking the valuables, the protagonist can choose to enter a contract with the entity called Tuyul, which would ensure her and her father's wealth. And in order to do that, the player needs to begin a ritual and summon the Tuyul, make offerings, and complete the ritual by sitting in a rocking chair and, well, breastfeeding the creature. And we choose to sit in the chair, and even at that point, the game still gives us the option to abort this, to get up, or continue with the ritual and complete the contract by breastfeeding the Tuyul. And this is literally taking the fate of the character in their own hands. And this is why I think this is the best example of how games can empower the player and create a state of nearly perfect immersion by using by incorporating themes of magic. And that would be pretty much it. If anyone's interested, the games that I took into consideration are these. The mortuary assistant is missing, but it's just one. And if anyone is also interested in any kind of discussion concerning close analysis of case studies of games, then there are other texts where I do go on and on and on about that. So thank you very much. That's it from me.
Thank you very much. I think there would be time for one question. So